طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome everyone to today's lecture, which is continuing to our last lecture about the workload. We have talked about the workload in the last time and how it's affecting your muscles, and we talked about the fatigue اللي هو الإجهاد للعضل. Today the workload on the mental side للجزء الذهني, and we will, instead of the fatigue اللي هو الإجهاد العضلي, we will talk about the stress اللي هو الإجهاد الذهني الخاص بالإدراك. So what is the stress? In psychology we refer to stress about the adverse reaction when you have excessive pressure or work. In the engineering, as you maybe covered that in mechanical courses or manufacturing, is the load that apply to material. But we refer now about stress to, in this course, the context of the psychological part, which is the reaction, the adverse reaction that individuals have to excessive pressure or other demands placed on them. What are the stress causes? What cause stress? Heavy load like workloads, for example, muscle strains, that will cause also stress when you are working in an activity that require a heavy load. It will cause you definitely stress. Time pressure. I give you an example. In the exam, the stress will be more than compared to now to the class. So the time. Why? Because there is a limited time. Your assessment will be for this course based on this limited time. For the presentation, for example, of the project, you have 5 minutes to present. So the time limitation for that will give you more stress, how you produce or you perform your work in the best shape. So the limit amount of time usually cause also stress. Environmental factors like noise, the lights, vibrations also can cause stress. Vibration reduce the quality of the visual. If something like the projector here, if the screen was vibrating or is not clear, it will cause you stress because you're going to focus on the screen where it's not stable. Also, the noise factor will reduce the quality of audio input. If there is constructions going or drilling next to our classroom here, it will cause you stress in hearing my voice and focusing on sometimes the fire alarm during the exams when it's just rise the voice, it causes you stress to focus on your exam. So these causes of stress, we call them direct factors. We have indirect factors like unfriendly instructor like me. It causes you stress in your life. The psychological factors we call it. The psychological factor اللي هو الجزء السيكولوجي أو النفسي. We call this indirect. Those, the previous one, we call them direct, and this one we call it indirect. Poor information processing efficiency to increase due to the increased level of arousal. Arousal المقصود به اللي هو التركيز ولا الإثارة الاستشعار في التركيز، فبتخليك أنت تعمل processing بشكل كبير، فبيعمل لك إجهاد للذهن حقك. For example, I give you a very a complex problem. So sometimes we can combine indirect with direct factor to cause stress. Like a difficult question during exam, and the time is limit, and you have to solve that question, and the question require focus from you. So these all together can, both direct and indirect factors, appear in such case. Sometimes even the firefighters during events, they have to have more than one factors to put down the fire. That's why we call these type of jobs like police or firefighters, they have frequent challenge of indirect factor of stress. So the psychological reaction to stress can be either positive or negative. How positive? If the psychological factor was good, then it will impact on you good. You will be happy with the environment or with the work or the task you have. If it's negative, then it will be negative. As we said also, I can be as an instructor cause you indirectly a psychological factor, because I can put you in a stress mood by having some uncomfort questions during the presentation, which we do that sometimes. So the stress can impact positive and negative. It affect the nerve system and the endocrine system اللي هو نظام الغدد ممكن تتأثر لما يكون الإنسان تحت ضغط لفترة طويلة أو ستريس عالي. طبعا this is not easy, and it's not just you take it as it's serious matter. The stress العامل النفسي جزء كبير ترى بيأثر على العامل الجسدي لأنه مرتبط به. الغدد ممكن يعني يقل افرازاتها للهرمونات، نشاطها ممكن يتأثر بالإجهاد، الدبريشن ممكن يأثر على الجزء الجسدي، حتى الحالة المظهر العام الخارجي ممكن يتأثر بعملية الستريس. Some strategies can control the stress. Time management is very important because you don't put yourself in this stress factor, direct one, which is we call the time pressure. So the time management ما تأجل المذاكرة قبلها بيوم بعدين تقول عند اختبار وما لي نفسي قبل حد. Work task condition level of the work, it has to be identified from the beginning so you know what you are going to handle. Training, that's why we ask you to practice sometimes for questions in some courses to solve them by hand before the exam. Relationship with the supervisor and co-workers, like you are working in a team. If the team doesn't have homogeneity between the members, it causes sometimes stress to some of the members. Who's taking sometimes the leadership in the team, he will have more stress in handling the work. So this can be طبعا كيف نتعامل لها تحسين. You take some trainings to how to work with others, how to handle pressure, there are some trainings that you can do and take that helps you, because in the career you will face that definitely. As you face it sometimes in some courses, some instructors, some exams, in the work you may face a supervisor that is very tough person, his personality is hard. How you will handle, how you will deal with him, then you will go back home, you have other responsibilities, other constraints or problems, so that could all put you in a stress mood. Organizations roles and policies, this is important because sometimes the time shift in organization اللي هم بيشتغلوا لساعات طويلة وبيغيروا لهم أوقات العمل can put them in a stress mood. Example of stressors at work environments here, like we said, workload complexity، يعني بيكون صعب جدا التاسك، أو حتى تكون قلنا الإجهاد العضلي لفترات طويلة ممكن يعمل ستريس. threatening، bullying، boss، يعني بيجيك رئيس فعلا ممكن على مستوى حتى التشيلدرن في السكول، يعني ممكن تسبب أحيانا لحالات اكستريم إنه يكون مجموعة يتنمروا على واحد، فيبقى بالذات لما يكون كيدز يعني ما يعرف كيف يتعامل مع الموضوع ده، فبيبقى ممكن حتى يسبب له عدم ثقة في نفسه أو شيء زي كده. هذه بنتكلم بس examples and يعني many others. We will move on because I'm trying to focus on the part where is the assessment and the lab experiment. The effect of stress has four effects, four type of categories. It's important to know the categories. Psychological problems اللي هو القلق، depression اكتئاب. الفيزيكال حتى الستريس بيدخل على الفيزيكال، معناه يدخل على أعضاء الجسم. ليه؟ أنت لو كنت تحت ستريس وقست ضغط الدم الهارت ريت حقك حيكون طبيعي؟ ما حيكون طبيعي. الواحد احيانا مع صدمه مع خبر الهارت ريت ممكن يصير اغماء، بتصير بس بمجرد خبر لا سمح الله مو كويس، وهو ما هو فيزيكال، يعني انت ما حد جاء ضربه، هو بيكون كلام. فمعناها موضوع العامل النفسي، احنا when we talk about ergonomics we look to the whole picture. ليش؟ هي تحت الهيومن فاكتور discipline in the IE. ايش يعني هيومن فاكتور؟ عامل بشري، والعامل البشري جزء منه نفسي زي ما هو في جزء منه عضوي. فالفيزيكال we are all familiar like heart rate, disturbed sleeping اللي هو sometimes they call it اللي هو um, أرق. أيوة بالضبط، اللي هو الأرق اللي بيكون، أو أحيانا يصير اضطرابات في النوم، كل كم ساعة تلقاه يصحى كذا مثلا. هذه physical problem. maladapted behavior related to stress، عادات سيئة ممكن يكتسبها الشخص وقت الستريس. طبعا هنا موضوع السلوك والوازع الديني مهم جدا، لأنه ممكن takes you to لا سمح الله أمور خطيرة جدا، يعني drugs ولا smoking ولا drinking ولا يعني any bad behaviors. Organization effect ممكن also affect the organization itself. absence، يعني زي كذا كنت في البداية أنا قلت يمكن أنا عندي psychological effect عليكم فبتغيبوا اليوم، بس لا بدأ الحضور كويس. لكن هو ممكن يصير إنه في يصير absence عندك في الorganization. reduction في productivity والquality حق الwork. measurements كيف نقيسه؟ عندنا 3 types of measurements: performance, psychological, عفوا physiological، والquestionnaire. الquestionnaire will be related to the psychological part. So we have performance، أداء. إحنا ممكن من الأداء نعرف إنه هذا الشخص تحت ستريس ولا لا. الwork rate، معدل عمله. And it's very important how you standardize the process. How you say that the output for this person who's going to do this task per hour, this amount. You have to measure it for different people in different situations, so you can get the average. And then the people who perform below, you can evaluate whether they have lack of skills, lack of trainings, or maybe it could be some kind of stress that they are not performing well. كثير من الطلاب في مسيرتي in the education I have faced يعني some external factors. ممكن يكون عنده أمور خارجية برا الجامعة فبتأثر عليه، تأثر على أدائه، تأثر على تركيزه في المحاضرة، وهذا شيء طبيعي. إحنا قلنا we said we are human at the end. physiological part اللي هو as we said blood heart rate or blood pressure. questionnaire and survey, this is another method how we measure the stress, and we will talk about this يعني coming, and you will do some practices. mental workload measurement، قياس الworkload مو هو من ناحية الفيزيكال زي ما we covered in the last lecture about the mental part. we have 3 type of measures. هنا we talked about the categories of the measures. Now we are talking about the methods that is related to each one, and we will emphasize on each one and we will break it down. Measures of primary and secondary task performance. What is the primary and what is the secondary task performance? البرايمري task performance هي التاسك اللي you know the amount needed or the how you do it before you do it. يعني خلاص انت عارف الانرجي اللي محتاجها، ايش الخطوات العمل حقتها، واضحة عندك انك ايش تسوي فيها. السكندري تاسك اللي هي بيحتاج فيها البرفورمانس انه يدخل على الجزء غير المعلوم، فيبدأ يستخدم من الانرجي في التفكير انه كيف حتتعامل. simplify it to you. It's like when I put sometimes in the questions very easy questions, like when you read it, this is some of the absolute information you have read it, or anyone attended the class or even didn't attend it can answer those questions. And we go to the extreme difficult question where it's really need more thinking beyond than what you have learned in this class to have practice of the critical thinking. So we can say that the primary task and this is the secondary task. To simplify it, there is a definition for that, but the definition it will be complex, يعني make it more complex to understand it, but I'm trying to make it simple for you. The object we call it objective physiological measurement اللي هي الأجزاء المرتبطة بالهارت ريت والبلاد بريشر لأنها objective tangible بتقيسها بأجهزة بأدوات. بعدين عندنا subjective. إيش يعني subjective؟ يعني أحد يعرف إيش what does it mean subjective؟ هي opposite of objective. الobjective is not a place of guessing or putting arbitrarily. احط جهاز temperature بيقول لي حرارتي، ما القى خمه والله حرارتي شكلها 35، ما هي على كيفي، هي حتحط الجهاز يقول 37 37 صح؟ هذا objective. subjective والله انا حاسس انه هو صعب السؤال اختبار. هنا subjectivity لانه انا صعب عندي، ممكن معتز thinks it's okay، حازم ممكن ولا حسام thinks it's easy، فهنا subjective. طيب this is the subjective is the opposite of the objective. subjective assessment tools. الفسيولوجيكال اللي هي الاوبجكتيف اللي هي ما هي مجال للجيسنج، هذه امثله. some of them you already have done it maybe. the heart rate, eye movement, يعني you have seen maybe in eye doctors they use like lights and you have to follow to track the اللي هو البؤبؤة البابل، هذه بيشوفها كيف حركتها واستجابتها، اتساعها وضيقها على حسب الضوء، الدياميتر حقها مهم. المسل تنشن، الاي اي جي والاي سي جي، قياس اشارات المخ مهم. هذا one of the major diagnosing for the physiological part of the mental workload. بتشوفوه بتحط احد شاف اي سي جي جهاز تخطيط قلب اكيد يمكن ده مور فاميليار، بتحطوا باتشز هنا حوالي 9 و11 مع الجراوند، بعد كده بيربطها بجهاز وبيشوف قراءات القلب حتى يتاكد انه العمليات حقت القلب العضويه صحيحه. زيه بيكون للبرين. البرين اصعب لانه في انسليشن هنا على الجلد مباشره، هنا بيكون غالبا الفروه وشعر وكذا، فاحيانا بيضطروا يعني اذا كان حالات انه يعني يصير فيه علاقه للمنطقه اذا كانوا بيوصلوا لشيء معين او ما جات القراءه بشكل كافي. القراءات لا كمان انه السيجنالز فيري ويك، وهذه السنسورز اللي بتقيس لازم تكون يعني مصمم بحيث انها تلقط اقل سيجنالز، فبتتحط الباتش بدل الهارت بتكون على البرين، بتقيس نشاط المخ الكهربائي والإشارات الكهربائية اللي بتيجي من المخ. هذا مرتبط بالergonomics. who is going to continue his studies in ergonomics, he will interact with the biomedical engineering and he will develop some of these devices in a way that fit the use and fit the needs of the human brain. Clear so far? It's okay? طيب. Now we go to the practical part that you will do. It's the subjective assessment. You remember here we talked about the primary. Here we didn't have any tools to explain, but we explained the difference between the primary and the secondary performance. Then we talked about the physiological part and then the subjective assessment tools. We have 3 subjective assessment tools. We will cover them all and you will apply 2 of those. NASA Task Load Index, we call it TLX, and Subjective Workload Assessment Technique, SWOT, different than the SWOT of the business or the project management. That SWOT. هنا SWAT. Modified Cooper-Harper Scale, MCH. Let's start with NASA TLX. If you spare with me and watch this video, let's watch it together. It's a very informative video about the tool, and I also put the link in the slide so you can watch it later. So we will watch the video together and then come back to continue.
A way of quantifying the subjective feelings of difficult versus easy for a task?
From here,
the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Task Load Index is one way to accomplish this. This subjective, multidimensional assessment tool was published in 1988 by the Human Performance Group at NASA's Ames Research Center over 3 years and after dozens of laboratory simulations. It is a post-task questionnaire used to measure workload assessments associated with a given task. It is used by designers, manufacturers, and managers to assess subjective workload in any task in order to improve task safety and worker performance by identifying workload costs, as well as specific factors that influence the perceived workload of the task. Since its development, it has been applied to many situations, most commonly in workplace environments that involve human and machine interfaces, such as aviation, office workstations, or labs. In the world of human factors research, it is recognized as the gold standard in subjective mental workload assessment, and its influence is reflected in its multiple translations and worldwide use. Let's move on to the context in which the NASA TLX is used. We will start with understanding the concept of mental workload. Mental workload describes the level of attentional resources required to complete a task. It can be influenced by task demands, external support, or past experience. Modern technology imposes greater cognitive demands upon operators than physical demands. Therefore, understanding how mental workload affects performance is essential. The NASA TLX can be used to design jobs that have a lower mental workload and in turn lead to lower stress levels and reduced accident rates in the workplace. Mental workload is a multidimensional concept. The main categories of workload measurement are performance-based, physiological, and subjective. The NASA TLX has been found to be the most valid measurement of subjective workload, to have the highest user acceptance, to provide sensitive measures of operator load, and to have the smallest between-subject variability. Evaluations of operators' performance can be difficult, and the need to assess subjective mental workload is critical. Before we begin discussing the specific steps in using the NASA TLX, we will break down the components and what they mean. While watching the following video, think about what could contribute to the stress experienced by the taxi driver. Keep in mind the ideas of
mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, own performance, effort, and frustration.
Hi. Hey, where can I take you? Walden Library, please. Okay, awesome. Just let me put in my GPS. Do you mind if I turn on the music? Yeah, go ahead. It's really rainy. Let me just turn on my windshield wipers.
Won't you let it go? Baby, don't worry. Just let it go, let it go. Don't you worry. Won't you let it go?
Yo!
Yeah, it was a good time. They were really
Whoa!
fucking it. One guy even knew the Gangnam Style dance.
Wow, I'm really sorry. That honestly came out of nowhere. I'll take you to your destination now. There's a lot of things that I have to pay attention to. This rain isn't helping at all.
We'll come back to this situation after going through the subscales in more detail, as well as the specific steps in using the NASA TLX. These 6 dimensions can be further divided into 3 factors that relate to the demands of the task, including mental, physical, and temporal demands. The other 3 scales specifically look at the interaction of the task and the user. These include effort, frustration, and performance. When a user is given a NASA TLX package, the 6 scale items are always presented with their definitions. This ensures that the user is familiar with the right definitions and that there is no variability between users. The first subscale is mental demands, and is defined as the amount of mental and perceptual activity required for a task. Was the task easy or demanding? Simple or complex? Exacting or forgiving? The second subscale, physical demands, includes the amount of physical activity required for the task, such as pushing, pulling, or controlling. The user must think about whether the task was easy or demanding, slow or brisk, restful or laborious, or slack or strenuous. Temporal demands describes the pressure the individual felt due to the pace at which the task occurred. Was the pace slow and leisurely, or rapid and frantic? The fourth item, own performance, describes how successful the individual felt after completing the task. Did they accomplish the goals that were previously set? And how satisfied were they by their performance? Effort describes how hard the individual had to work to perform at the level that they did, whether it be mentally or physically. Frustration deals with the feelings of insecurity, irritation, or discouragement felt during the task.
It's time for multiple choice question.
not a rating scale item? Is it A, frustration, B, physical demands, C, cognitive impairment, or D, own performance? If you answered cognitive impairment, you are correct.
Now that you know how to properly describe the scales, how will you administer the NASA TLX? To begin, the user must read the instructions. They must also read the scale definitions to ensure accuracy and complete understanding when the scales are being filled out. The next step is for the user to become familiar with the technique of filling out the scales. If necessary, this can be done by practicing using the scales with sample tasks to ensure the user understands each subscale.
The steps are listed
If the NASA
on the
TLX
slides. We will
Physical
move
demand.
to the
Man, my back was
how you fill the code of the NASA TLX based on the examples that we
mental
have
demand.
covered later as previously.
Wasn't too mentally demanding.
So this is
Physical
the
demand.
form.
Man,
This is
my
how,
back was really hurting.
how you fill it. But
Temporal
now we'll see
demand,
on the previous
definitely took a
example
while.
how the
Right
score
there.
will be placed.
My performance, I think I did okay eventually. This took a long time. I'll put it right in the middle. Effort, put in quite a bit of effort. And the task was extremely frustrating. That's there. Perfect. To obtain the overall score, the 15 comparison cards are coded in the same way. Let's see it in action. Now we will see an example of how the NASA TLX tool is used in the workplace.
Mary, could you come to the storage room, please?
What do you need?
Hey, can I get you to move all these chairs to the delivery dock, please?
Yeah.
Okay,
for sure
great.
I can do that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Shouldn't be too hard.
Oh, Mary, what's wrong?
I'm just trying to move all these chairs for Nadia, and it's really tough. They're really heavy, and I don't know if I can move all of these chairs. I'm kind of worried, though. She said she really needs it done, and what if I can't do it? It's tough on my back. I've got this chronic low back pain, and if I get fired, I can't afford that. I've got OSAP on my back. I've got bills to pay. I don't know. I'm pretty stressed out.
Oh my God, that is a heavy workload. Hey, Mary,
Now,
remember
that
that
was
job
the
I got you to
task.
do to move all those
It's a
chairs last
related
week?
task.
I
Now,
was
how
wondering if
she
you could
was
do a workload
based
analysis.
on the task she was assigned to.
In that video, we saw an example of a task that was very physically demanding, but not particularly mentally demanding. It would be rated appropriately on the NASA TLX. What about a more complicated task? Let's think back to the taxi driver.
بالنسبة لهذه فاكرين الإكزامبل ده هنا كان
No.
both
Yeah, it was a good time.
بيحتاج
They were
منتج لأنه
really
بيحتاج تركيز إنه
One guy
في
even knew
ضباب
the
في
Gangnam
مطر
Style dance.
Wow,
تستخدم
I'm
جي بي
really
إس
sorry. That honestly came out of
في أكثر
nowhere.
من حاجة ذهنية
I'll
لازم
take you to your
تعملها
destination
processing
now.
in a short time.
There's a lot of
مقارنة
things that I have to pay
بهذه
attention
حسب
to.
التاسك.
This rain
أحيانا
isn't
التاسك
helping at
تجتمع
all.
فيها اثنين أحيانا بيكون واحد منهم
What factors would have influenced her mental workload? Think about this in terms of the 6 NASA TLX subscales we reviewed earlier. We'll give you a few seconds to do this.
هو بيقول لك هنا حاول انك انت تقيم السائل اللي في التاكسي بناء على النموذج اللي هي الستة معايير.
Did you consider these stressors? The rain, the
فاكرين
loud radio,
الانفايرمنت
the pedestrians walking by, the GPS,
الاوديو
the stress of having to reach the destination as quickly as possible. All of
الشخص
these
اللي بيمشي
factors
من
would
خلف.
contribute to the taxi driver's overall perception of workload. Let's try it. Now imagine that you are in the same situation. Take out a printed copy of the NASA TLX rating scale and fill it out as if you were the taxi driver, and your task was to drive the passenger to their destination in that weather. Think back to what each scale item means, and remember to use an X to mark the appropriate spot. This is how our taxi driver rated each item.
هذا بناء عليها هي كيف قيمت نفسها. حطت المنتال ديماند هاي حسب تقييمها هي. عشان كده you remember we said subjective not objective, different than when I measure temperature. I'm using a device will show me exactly what is the temperature, but the subjective has some point, some opinion, some point of view. فممكن تفرق منك لها. ممكن انت بتقول لا هي ما هي محتاجه هذا المنتل لود انه يكون هاي، بس هي شايفتها قيمت نفسها انها اتس هاي. الفيزيكال there is physical لكن لو ما يعتبر بالقدر اللي هو محتاج حضور الذهني اكثر. التمبر اللي هو التمبرال قديش بيكون عندنا احنا الفريكونسي وسرعه العمل، قديش انت محتاج انها تكون مركزه على السياره ومركز على الشخص اللي بيمشي، والمطر بيحجب الرؤيه، ففي عندنا اكثر من حاجه، والبيت حقها سريع. يعني الشخص ده اللي ظهر في الخلف مفاجاه، ما كان في preparation. احيانا هنا ميزه some of the sensors you design في الكار gives you the blind spots even for the cars that approaching from the side، فيديك peeping والسياره لسه ما جات في مجال تحركك من الخلف، هي جايه من الجهه الثانيه، فبيعطيك صوت هو بيكون يستشعر انه في جسم جاي. فهذه تقلل من عمليه انه انا يكون عندي التمبورال ديماند يكون عالي. هنا فجاه لقيتها بتقول لك انا فروم نو وير شفتها هذه ظهرت عندي. البرفورمانس هي قيمت نفسها كيف في اداء العمل. الافورت هي كيف شافت الافورت اللي احتاجته عشان تؤدي العمل فحطته هاي. بعدين الفرستريشن، عارفين الفرستريشن اللي هو يعني يو ار فرستريتد، ما انت كالم، عكس اللي هو الكالم بيكون اللي هو عدم الراحه. فهذه الاكزامبل I will leave the remaining of the video, you can watch it later your own, but it was a good explanation of the of this tool. So the sheet is here, I will upload it on the Edmodo. Okay, and you can scale it here from starting from 1, 5, and you can put numeric number. So if you want to calculate that numerically, so you can evaluate that numerically, and also we can see to the which one was the high, which one is the low. So you can adjust the task accordingly. إيش اللي نحتاج نسويه في التاسك هذه، أو إيش إذا كان شخص بيسوق وبيواجه ده الشيء بشكل متكرر، ايش الريستريكشنز، ايش الجايد لاينز اللي نحطها في اوقات مثلا الهيفي رين، فبنقول انه هنا حتحجب الرؤيه لمدى معين في الكيلومتر، فاحنا نتجنب مثلا نقول لك الدرايفنج في الكونديشن هذه كلها related. When you design even the car itself, how I design it to reduce المنتال ديماند والتمبورال ديماند. كيف اقلل؟ زي ما قلنا الحساسات 360 فيجن او البيرد فيجن يسموها، فبتقللي بشوف الاشياء اللي جايه من قبل ما توصلني. هذه كلها بتخلي انه انت بيكون عندك الفكره اللي صايره الان في الصناعات في السيارات بالذات، انه قديش بيقلل الانتراكشن حق الهيومن. ليه؟ يصير كله اوتوميتد، فيصير الهيومن less stressed in terms of the driving practice or task. طيب واضحه؟ طيب this is the first tool. بعدين نروح على السكند تول اللي هي السوات. السوات has 3 dimension مختلفة تماما، هي ما هي numerical. هي these 3 dimension when you look to the task you decide on each dimension which one falls for this or applicable for this task. I will explain. The 3 dimension are time, mental, and psychological stress. التايم لود له كل واحدة منهم لها 3 levels، من الأقل level لأعلى level. الأقل level إنه أنا بيكون عندي enough time or enough breaks or enough طبعا breaks حتى لو كان either during the work task or between the day and day of work. ألين لما أوصل للهاي level اللي هو almost never have spare time، ما بيكون عندي. فهنا interruptions of overlap among activities are very frequent or occur all the time. فما عندي almost interruptions، بيكون all the time بيكون عندي عمل، ما بيكون عندي وقت للبريك. فإحنا لما نشوف التاسك هذه أو الوظيفة هذه أو الجوب ديسكريبشن لما تقدم، هل هذه من ناحية التايم لود قديش بتعمل كونسومشن لحياتك، لإنرجي حقتك، لتركيزك، هذا جزء اللي هو الخاص بالتايم. يعني التايم مرتبط بالجزئين اللي حنتكلم عنهم، المنتل والسايكولوجيكال. الجزء الأول الخاص بالتايم. الجزء الثاني المنتل. المنتل اللي هو ما طبعا ايش اللي يفرق بينه وبين السايكولوجيكال؟ المنتل الكوجنيتيف حقتك، التركيز حقك، الادراك. السايكولوجيكال الحاله النفسيه حقتك مضطربه مرتاحه، لانه انت ممكن تكون مركز في فيلم فما في سايكولوجيكال ستريس، يعني انت مركز في فيلم مبسوط فيه، يعني قصدي انت بتشاهد موفي ولا عرض ولا اي برنامج تي في ومركز. فالمنتل فاكتور عندك الافورت في تركيز عالي وقتها، الكونسنتريت عالي. but the psychological stress load ما عندي لود ستريس، يعني انا بشاهده مستمتع، يمكن بضحك كمان بس مركز فيه. فرقته بين psychological والمنتل. فالمنتل عندنا برضو 3 levels. extensive اللي هو اعلى شيء mental effort and concentration, very complex activity and total attention needed. هذا بيكون اعلى شيء في الكونسنتريشن في المنتل بارت، انه تكون مره كومبلكس التاسكس ولا الجوب ديسكريبشن حقتها، وبتحتاج attention بشكل دقيق. I give you example زي اللي بيشتغلوا في ابراج المراقبه حق الطيران، هذه من الجوبز اللي بتسبب كل الثري هذه بتكون على الهاي ليفل. التايم حقها عملهم وقت لاوقات طويله، بيكون عندك extensive concentration، لانه بيكون عندك كل الطائرات انت بتراقبها وبتعطي اوردرز اذا كان في واحده خرجت عن مسارها. اي غلطه هنا معناها حادث لا سمح الله، وفيات على طول. فاللي ممكن يو كان واتش فيديوز على موضوع المراقبات اللي هي الجويه وتشوفوا كيف انه هذه من الجوبز اللي تعتبر هاي ستريس جوب. الفاير فايترز برضو ممكن يكون عندهم، الناس اللي هم الكابتن قائد الطائره ده برضو بيكون عنده منتل ايفورت، بيكون عنده تايم، لانه هو ممكن يكون في رحله مدتها 16 ساعه حتى لو كان في بريك. فهنا ممكن يكون في عندنا occasional spare time during the job، لكن بالنسبه للمنتل ايفورت اكيد بيكون عالي. هنا السايكولوجيكال طبعا حتعتمد اذا كان هل هو مودريت ولا بيكون لو، ما بيوصل للهاي في عمليه الطيران، لكن ممكن تكون هاي في بعض الوظائف الاخرى زي مراقبه لانه you are not just focusing، يعني الطيار بيراقب جهاز او سياره او عفوا المركبه الكابينت حقته. هناك انت you are monitoring multiple airplanes from the world، يعني بتشوفها بشكل معقد اكثر. عمليه التركيز والمخاطره فيها بتكون اعلى، دائما ريسك عالي، فبيكون عندي ستريس لا شك عالي. اللي بيكونوا على الحد، يعني التايم ما هو اصلا في الدايمنشن حقهم، في اي وقت ممكن يقول لهم لازم تكون مباشر. المنتل ايفورت ما فيها مزح، يعني هي والسايكولوجيكال ستريس اكيد الاثنين موجودين، لانه في اي لحظه يعني حياته ممكن تروح. والمنتل ايفورت تركيز بيكون عالي للانمي، فمستوعبين انه هذه how these three together. فاحنا we divide them in 3 levels. Each one of those category we divide it into 3 levels from low to high. So you can assess the task or the job based on these 3 factors that impact on the mental load. And last tool اللي هي required from you also to do with the NASA TLX هي ال MCH. ال MCH has a numeric scale from 1 to 10 about the cognitive only. إيش يعني الكوجنيتيف؟ الجزء الإدراكي فقط. العامل النفسي لاحظ الأداة الوحيدة اللي ما هي مرتبطة بالسايكولوجيكال بارت من ال 3 this one MCH. In the NASA TLX and in the SWAT we have the psychological stress load assist. حتى هنا الفرستريشن تمام، لكن هنا احنا نتكلم only on the cognitive part from scale 1 to 10 where is 1 easy, 5 moderate and 10 is high. This is how you proceed to implement this tool. You identify the task job. You start from bottom. تبدأ من الأسفل. طيب read the question here. Even though errors may be large or frequent, can instructed task be completed most of the time? معناها ايش الكلام ده؟ انه انا صح بيكون عندي اخطاء في عمل التاسك هذه، لكن ممكن اعملها يعني في الاخير بالانستركشن. ايش يعني بالانستركتد؟ يعني احد يعطيني التعليمات حقتها، لكن برضو في اخطاء كبيره بتصير لما انا اعملها. يعني في خطا احتاج انستركتد وممكن اعملها، بس في خطا كبير بيصير في العمل، فمعناها عمليه المخاطره انها تصير صحيحه جدا عاليه. انه هي فاذا انت اجابتك كانت نو، يعني فوق هذا كله انه هي ممكن كمان ما حتصير اصلا، ما حتكتمل، يعني حيكون اخطاء طول الوقت، فحيكون هذا الاكستريم كونديشن. معناها ايش دي؟ instructed task cannot be accomplished reliably. ايش يعني؟ هي حتى بالانستركتد انه يكون عليك احد وبيدربك وبيعلمك، وانت برضه ممكن ما حتقدر. you cannot do it reliably، يعني you cannot perform it correctly. تمام؟ This is the extreme condition. If it's no still يعني I can do it correctly with the instructed, you move to the lower level. Are errors small and inconsequent يعني is not going to be frequent to be appeared, and they are small if yes or no. If it's yes, then you move to the lower level. If it's no, then it's going to be high. This is high. This is the extreme one. اللي هي we call it impossible task. تمام? Here, this is major difficult task to do. This one is like I give you a question that you cannot solve. No one can solve. يعني بس I'm just giving an example. Here, it's a question that can be maybe solved by one or two out of the students. طبعا when I talk about question and students في factors مختلفة. أنا بس بعطي يعني إنه I'm instructing you how to do it. You already practice by your own. ما كنت نايم وأنت جيت بتحله. ففي يعني بس أنا بتكلم هنا في instructions بتصير في instructed task، فبيكون عندنا إنه في deficiency في major difficulty. But if the errors are small and ما بتتكرر بشكل كبير، فإحنا بننتقل لمرحلة أخف. فيجينا السؤال اللي بعده: Is the mental workload level acceptable؟ هل الحمل الذهني للتاسك هذه acceptable؟ If yes، حننتقل لمرحلة الأخف اللي هي easy level أو easy difficulty. If no, then consider to be moderate، معتدلة الصعوبة. هذه عملية how we evaluate the task or the job based on the scale of modified Cooper-Harper scale. The description among the moderate and the small, the easy and the difficult, from 7 to 9, from 4 to 6 is given here. So it's a slight differences between them. That's why we called all these methods subjective methods. ليش؟ لأنه إحنا we can disagree about 5 and 6. ممكن يكون عندنا different point of view. هو بيديك description. الدescription ده برضو فيه له human factor. يعني even for the driver question, if maybe a female, it could be different than the male in terms of the evaluation or the assessment based on the يعني تركيبة البيولوجية للاثنين في عملية التركيز على مالتي تاسك أو على سنجل تاسك، أو أحيانا تكون ما بين within the gender between different people. يعني في ناس عندهم قدرة إنه هو يكلمك وبيشوف الجي بي اس وقاعد يشوف الطريق وبياكل وتلقاه عايش الحياة كلها هو في السيارة طبيعية جدا، وفي لا اللي بتلقاه جدا مركز ويعني وهذه فروقات skills. فإحنا هنا that's why we call it all these methods subjective methods. طيب the lab experiment, you will choose a task and assess the mental load using the following tools: the TLX and the MCH. Okay, you insert a picture of that task and describe it. What is this task and what is the result? You have to use this for the diagram to show me which one you select for your task, and this one here you have to fill the TLX sheet, this one, and it's going to be uploaded on the shared folder. Okay? Clear? Tamam? Fine. This is the last experiment you will do in this course. The overload, this is the last part, versus the underload. Basically, if the task demand greater than your capability, this is overload. If the task demand less than your capability, يعني منطقي انه هي الكابابيلتي اللي عندك اعلى من الاحتياج حقها. فalways the training will increase your capability and to handle more tasks and complex tasks. وهنا بيجينا التاسك بيرفورمانس تتطور بحاجتين، السكيلز، والسكيلز هذه تيجي مع التدريب، لانه ممكن يكون you are gifted but the trainings definitely will improve the skills. والwork experience، الخبرة دائما لها دور كبير في الحياة العملية in handling the task. ليش؟ In the experience you face different conditions and situations. This will be back in your يعني background when you see some scenarios similar to some previous examples or events happen to you in your life or in your work, how you will achieve or how you will resolve or how do you react to those tasks or to those problems. فدائما هذه العاملين اللي بترفع لنا من البرفورمانس في أداء العمليات. Work skills it comes by trainings. Work experience it comes by the time usually. عشان كده الجوب sometimes they request experience in certain positions. إنه هو in this experience 5 years he's expecting that you have been exposing to different situations, different systems, work with many clients if the job needs, so that will give them a person can be easy to fit the job and will reduce also will increase his capability to handle more complex tasks without mental load لأنه حتكون سهلة. في يعني أشخاص عندهم الكابابيلتي إنه هو or the experience to handle problems. Maybe for you as a fresh graduate you see it's complex and how I will do it. It's like when the students they face in a problem in the capstone, they usually come to the supervisor to ask, صح? Or their mentor to ask them how we proceed, how we do this. After time, if somehow similar problems appeared in their work similar to the one that they have faced before, they will have the experience how to handle it. صح? This is why the experience is needed. That's all for this topic. I hope it's clear. I will leave